Welcome to the first episode of Garage Theology. I'm here in my garage with it's not a brand new whiteboard, but it is a whiteboard. Might feel like a lecture, but I'm going to try to keep the energy going, as long promised and long awaited. Talking about the doctrine of revelation, and again, no like final book in the Bible, seven-horned beasts type things. We're going to look at how God reveals himself and how we can come to know God, how we can come to a full knowledge of him. So look at a brief history, then we'll sort of tie everything together so we can like find a synthesis. You know, we get the thesis, we get the antithesis, and we come together so that you can be empowered to understand more about God, share more about God, because I believe that this is fundamental to sharing the gospel and the revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ with anyone. It's understanding the doctrine of revelation and appealing to it. To see, so let's get going without further ado. We're going to look at John Frame's proposal. You might be thinking, this guy and triangles. But it's very useful in understanding epistemology. Epistemology is the knowledge of knowing. It's essentially asking the question, how can we know what we know? How do we know? And we've got a threefold triangle, as most triangles have. N-E-S. The N stands for the normative experience. The S is for the situational experience, and the E is the existential experience. So let's focus on the two legs at the bottom first. Understand that the existential experience, it kind of exists existential. It is about our subjective experience as a being. Most importantly, it's about your existence, about your internal being, about your experiences, about your interpretations of objects, your feelings. Existential, that my feelings are true. That might sound familiar to some of you. And then your situational experience, your situational knowing, is about your experience within the world. That could be your culture, your upbringing, what you are surrounded with. Because I can know there's a whiteboard because the whiteboard is next to me. I can existentially perceive that how I'm feeling about standing in front of the camera, or how you are feeling right now. Are you angry? Are you sad? How are you existentially knowing the world as in your being? But whereas the situational would more be physical. So then comes the normative. And the normative plays into our epistemology or knowing, as even the secular world doesn't appeal to it necessarily, but there is a consciousness of it. They are aware of it as they appeal to standards that are external to our existential and situational knowledge. This is like, how do you know murder is bad? It just is. Well, there must be a standard of truth outside both our existential and our situational. But we're going to come back to that as we're going to reveal more of it. We're going to move to the ancient Greeks and look at how they knew, because this is pertaining to our knowledge about God, the revelation of him. We're going to look at the ancient Greeks. As you can see, we've got the planet there. And this orange, it's a way to denote how the Greeks conjured up or thought about God, thought about being, existence. Plato, for example, thought of the world of the physical world would be the world of becoming, whereas the spiritual, the metaphysical world would be the world of being. So everything in reality is just a representation, a form, Plato's form, of what is metaphysically present in reality. And the Greeks sort of deduced that human beings, created in God's image, we know from the Bible, but from a secular point of view, recognized that this logos, this divine reason they thought of, was present in human beings. And this can be seen in the rational, our human faculties, able to reason, to deduce, to investigate, to rationalize. And that made them sort of aware as that humanity was a revelation of the divine Logos. And this Logos, depending on who you ask, was present in all matter and all being, because everything has reason, everything has order. And it's sort of these two oaks and the rest of them that sort of launched the modern world into investigating the rational, the Logos of everything. So whenever we say psychology, we say sociology, somatology, theology, it's all sciences, studies of a subject. Soma meaning body, Greek, study of the body, suke, Greek, psychology, study of the self, the soul, theology, study of God. So essentially, we have them to thank for our rationale, how we perceive and study what is in front of us. But they did hold to a God, to something that's external of their reality. Plato would hold that the world was sort of split in two, the becoming and the being, but then also there was the one that was sort of separate of all this, that put everything in place. But Aristotle would just say, no, it's a dual reality. There's the unmoved mover. Maybe you've heard about that something did put everything into existence. And this was like, they were theists. Plato, Aristotle, the Greek world, how they conjured God up actually shows the limits of our situational existential knowledge, our perspectives. Because through their existential reality, because they knew they were human beings and their ability to reason, they deduced that there must be a God, there must be something divine about separate from reality. And their situation, their study of the world, the ologies that developed from them, also led them to conclude that there was something, touch on something very profound. And I think people miss this, that actually these ancient Greek philosophers were theists. They believed in God, they believed in a God, a divine being, the source of all Logos, the source of all order. And then we skip a few centuries and we get to the Enlightenment. This 17th century, I spoke about it lightly in the previous video. And essentially the world went, none of this superstition anymore. We don't want the church, we don't want belief, we want hard facts. And they don't care about your feelings, and the facts, reason, that's going to save us. And we have a lot to thank for this, let me be honest. Instead of going to the shaman or the witch or seeking divine help for someone who's sick, doctors, medicine, schooling, study, developed from this. It was like, we're no longer going to lean on the spiritual or the what-ifs, but let's get something concrete. And reason is concrete. And that sort of opened the door to these oaks, the main players of the Enlightenment, debating essentially about rationality, like how do we know what's true? How do we know what we know? Enlightenment wasn't necessarily bad in human perspectives, but it did sort of put spirituality on the back seat that the Greeks actually still had in their minds. They said, no, none of this Logos stuff. We study what is there and we deduce. We study physics, we study chemistry, biology, all these things without the spiritual aspect of it. So, enter player one, Emanuel Kant. An easy way to remember this is Emanuel can't know objectively. Essentially what he proposed is that because we're all subjective beings, existential beings, we can only know our situations, and this includes the normative, which we'll get to. We can't truly know what is purely situational, because our existential experience, our prioris, our preconceived opinions are superimposed onto reality. So instead of because these perspectives are constantly interacting with one another, and that poses the problem about how do we know what is actually there, how do we know what is actually true. And Kant touched on this. He said, no, we can't know what this is or this is, because our existential projects onto it, and that makes the water murky, so to say. And then we move, and then into player 2. Rene Descartes. Might butcher it, but cogito ergo sum, which is that age-old phrase, I think every girl on Pinterest and Tumblr either knows it or has it tattooed somewhere on their body. I think, therefore I am. What Rene proposed in his philosophy was that all that I can know absolutely is that I know. All I know is that I exist. From that I should spring all my truth, all my knowledge. Rene did believe in God, interestingly enough. So these are worldly philosophies that sort of developed over the years. Again, this is a brush over, about how do we know what we know. So Descartes would emphasize the existential as well as Kant. It's all about what I know, and this has become, I'm going to draw an arrow here, this has become the normative in, I believe, Western cultures, in the sense that my experience, my truth, trumps the normative, the plain, the evident truth that exists. And you see how this becomes murky. Because our situational, let me draw an arrow, informs our existential, and our existential, rightly as Kant said, also informs our situational. We do impose, we do have priorities, we have prejudices, but they are not as dependent on each other as these philosophies would have them say. Like, my situational is still knowable by me. You can... Stop there. So, what they try to do is essentially cut this triangle in half and say, no, none of this outside of myself. I want to know, and I want to know fully, but that kind of just left them very existential, because all they could know was, what could Kant trust? He couldn't trust anything. And Rene couldn't know more than that he is. And that sort of stops us flat. But again, they struggle to appeal to natural law. That's also the start of another conversation. But how do they know what is right or wrong? How can they say the Holocaust is wrong without appealing to something above them? That's what makes it hard. Now we turn to the Bible, which has general and special. General and special revelation. Romans 1 Paul presents the case that although they knew the truth about God, and essentially saying, I'd encourage you to read Romans 1:80, maybe pause the video and have a look at it. He proposes that although God's truth, his existence, is self-evident, he actually accuses humanity of suppressing the truth about God and exchanging it for a lie. And he says that what is to be known about God is plain to see. And he alludes and he mentions general revelation. He mentions creation. What the philosophers noticed years ago about the logos, the reason in all things, whether it's the human body, in nature, in molecular structures, in plants, that actually screams for a creator, which is a great apologetic case to appeal to whenever you're sharing the gospel, or yourself an atheist. I think it's worth considering that the enlightened world and all the science that came from it hasn't really disproven God. I think they've actually just accumulated a better case and a more sophisticated case for God. That's what Paul says in Romans. Creation, his invisible qualities has been made known. God is revealing himself through creation, but generally and only partially. We can never know God fully, but we can know him truly. But what is known about God, for example, think about primitive tribes, wherever they are in the world, who hasn't been hit by this enlightenment bucket, who hasn't been esteeming their own experiences above the norm. An existence of God seems very common. One might say it's primitive, but it shows that mankind has this awareness that those that are in nature and away from TikTok and all that sort of deduce that, hey, there must be something greater. You can say, yes, it was an existential experience and a situational need that led to the formation of a normative. But that doesn't, if we think about that, it still doesn't answer the question why there is so much logos, why there is so much reason in the world that is for us to be uncovered. Biology, plants, studying plants, photosynthesis, mitochondria. These are interesting things. These are interesting subjects that we just continue to learn more and more about. So that points to a creator. That's what Paul says, that's what I believe, and there's a strong case to be made for the existence of a creator. I'd issue you Frank Turek, great apologetics, great apologist, Greg Rochelle, Lane William Craig, John Lennox. All of them sort of make this case. Jordan Peterson even makes this case, and they made the case. So how can we know God, right? Again, Paul poses us a problem, makes a statement that in the wisdom of the world, in its own rationale or logos, they did not know God. So that does mean that there is a bridge. There's a gap here between this separate realm that the Greeks conjured up. There's a gap. There's a vacuum. Like, how do we get from here to there? For in the wisdom of the world, we did not know God. So God chose the foolish things. God chose the cross. God chose his word, the divine incarnate word, Jesus Christ, to reveal himself. And Paul picks up on, especially in Ephesians as well, and Corinthians to my knowledge, where it picks up the knowledge of mystery. That God's mystery has been locked up to this time and has now been revealed. That God's intention was always to bridge this gap. From the normative, the author of the existential and the situational had to reveal himself to us. Because in the wisdom of God, in the wisdom of the world, we did not know God. We can attribute this to the limits of our reason if we only limit our perspectives to our existential and situational. If we only limit our ability to know from what we can see, what we can test tube prove, then we won't know God. Because we are so looking down that we forget to look in. We forget to look into. And we boast so much in our wisdom, Paul says in 1 Corinthians, in our knowledge of the world. I believe in science, I believe in facts, I don't believe in God. Well, all those things point to God. I genuinely consider that a very strong point, that the existence of God is self-evident. But in our wisdom, we cannot know God. We cannot expect to know God from our existential or situational norms. Because if we go from an existential, we are going to say you can deduce from Romans 1 that we can know that there is a normative, there's a God. Again, primitive tribes, most people just sort of took it for granted that, yeah, of course there's a God. Just look at all these amazing things we can do. We can deduce from that there's a norm. But if we are going to work, so we know there's a norm, we know there's a logos, we know there's something other, but if we go from our existential reality onto God, we form God in our own image. We, as Kant would say, we import our prior beliefs on God and then determine God based on our existential experience, based on our knowledge, based on what we think. We put that on God. And then my friends, we've got another problem, because then God is no longer God. We don't determine God. Even just think about this philosophically. How do these small matters of the logos tell the logos what to be or what it is? So whenever someone says, yeah, I'm a spiritual person, you know, I believe God is like this and God is like this, you can believe that, but it's not true, and neither is it a strong case. Because you're just making God in your own image. You're making him, you are trying to put the infinite in a box, in your own emotional space. And if we only deduce from our situations, from our situational experience or perspectives, then it also boils down God to a watered down version of himself. We idolize, we create idols. We build things. We worship this mountain, or we worship this statue, or we worship ourselves. So mankind tries to, this might look like a lead cake. Actually, no, I'm trying to build a tower. That's a tower. To bridge this gap, mankind tries to build this Tower of Babel, trying to go up to the heavens. But in the wisdom of man, in this wisdom of the world, we did not know God. So God chose the foolish things to reveal himself, the cross. The world thinks, why would God die on a cross? The world scorns at it, laughs at it. How could God become man? This doesn't make sense. Yeah, of course it doesn't make sense. Is God. He revealed himself. Of course it doesn't make sense. Because we can't appeal to all our faculties to know God. Because God is so much greater. They picked it up. They picked it up. All religions sort of pick it up. That, whoa, God is actually like much bigger than I thought he could be. As the prologue of John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He's using the word logos. Like, everything was created through him. There's reason. And there's something that points us back to God. Daniel is interesting. Daniel 2. A bit of a Hebrew for you here. What's this? Gale Razain? It talks about God being the revealer of mysteries. God being the revealer of secrets. And as Paul picks up, I think he picks up on this language and talks about the gospel being the mystery of God. But that God has to reveal this mystery to us. He comes down into our existential by changing our hearts through the Holy Spirit, and into our situations by the incarnation. He changes everything because he comes into our reality. Because our knowledge, we are not God. We are not gods either. We are human beings and we are limited. But if we only limit ourselves to our reason, we're not going to know God. But our reason can lead us to a partial knowledge of God. To know God fully means to know Jesus Christ. As Jesus says in John 14, he says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. I am the way to the normative. I'm the way to the perspective that we can't know in our limitations. And then Thomas says, hey, but just show us the Father and that would be enough. And Jesus replies, he says, do you not know, Thomas, that whoever has seen me has seen the Father? Jesus bridges this. He bridges the horizontal from God into the vertical. The normative experience with our situational and existential perspectives, so that we could come to know God. As Colossians says, that in him it pleased God, so that the fullness of the deity of God would dwell in him, in man. So whoever has seen Christ has seen the Father. And the trouble is that no other religion, I believe, in my opinion, meets all these criteria. Some religions are only boiled down to this situation, maybe a revelation to a single person. But no, Christ who was himself the normative, came down to show us the normative. Because any man who would interpret this normative as Kant would say, would superimpose onto it, and it wouldn't be the norm anymore. So the norm himself came and revealed himself to us in existence and in personal experiences, so that the world can come to know God, the normative, the unmoved mover, the supreme being. And this is not of ourselves. This is what Corinthians touches on in the preceding chapters, which we'll get to. I promised this as well, and Daniel as well. God needs to reveal himself to us. We can seek him, seek and you shall find, I believe, but without him actually changing our perspectives, illuminating our perspectives, we cannot know him. We can deduce that there is a God, but to know him for who he is dependent on him revealing himself to us. So I hope this video helped. I hope this meant something to someone. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's continue the conversation. Yeah, I'm not striving for perfection, but tell me, on a scale from 1 to 10, what do you think and what I could do better in the future to get closer to a 10? I'm not perfect, I'm just a human being. We strive for good, and that's great. But yeah, I'd love your interaction. So this was the Doctrine of Revelation. Shout out to, I'll put some references in the comments where I did my reading, and also for further reading if you'd like to think more. And feel free to reach out. I'd love to interact with you. More of this coming. We're going to do some more garage theology going forward. And yeah, remember to like.